You ever find yourself in a battle with yourself? I mean, you know that feeling. You know exactly what you should do, but what you want to do is pulling you in the complete opposite direction. It's a struggle we all face, and it brings up a really fascinating question. What does it actually mean to be a good person? Is it about winning that internal fight, or is it about not having to fight at all?
To really get to the heart of this, let's kick things off with a simple story. Just picture two different people, both about to give money to the exact same charity.
And this gets us right to our core question. As we look at these two donors, I want you to ask yourself, who here is actually the better person? You might find the answer isn't as simple as it first seems.
Okay, so on one side you have the willing donor. For this person, the decision is a piece of cake. They actually get joy, real pleasure out of giving. But then you've got the struggling donor. This person hesitates. You can tell they feel the pull of just keeping the money. But through sheer force of will, they make the exact same donation. Now, our first instinct might be to praise the willing donor, but isn't there something just incredibly admirable about the effort the struggling donor put in?
To help us untangle this whole dilemma, we're going to bring in one of the heavy hitters of philosophy, Aristotle. He looked at this and didn't just see a simple choice. He saw it as a window into different inner states of character. He actually created a kind of map of the soul, breaking it down into 4 distinct types.
So here's Aristotle's breakdown. He says this whole internal battle comes down to the relationship between our reason and our desires. At the very top, you've got virtue, where your reason and desires are in total harmony. Next down is continence, where your reason wins, but it was a fight. Then there's incontinence, where your desires went out. And finally, you have vice, which is, well, it's a whole other level of messed up.
Let's start with Aristotle's gold standard, virtue. This is our willing donor right here. For someone who is virtuous, doing the right thing has become like second nature. There is no inner conflict. They don't just do the right thing, they find a deep, almost noble joy in doing it because their head and their heart are pointing in the exact same direction.
Next up, we've got continence, and this is our struggling donor. Aristotle actually had a great word for this person, enkrates, which means self-controlled. They feel that internal tug of war, for sure, but their reason ultimately comes out on top. They do the right thing, yeah, but it's a hard-won victory. And let's be honest, this is a state most of us can probably relate to.
And then there's incontinence. The Greek word for it is akrasia. And this is that awful, frustrating feeling of knowing exactly what you're supposed to do. You know, eat the salad, finish your work, go to the gym, but your desires just take over and you do the complete opposite. You know what's right, but you just don't do it. And you're left feeling conflicted and pretty miserable.
Finally, we get to vice. Now, this is totally different from incontinence because here, there's no struggle. The person's reason has become corrupted. They genuinely believe that the wrong thing is the right thing to do. They've convinced themselves that good things, like being generous, are just pointless. So while they might seem to have it all together on the inside, Aristotle would say they're deeply, deeply misguided and ultimately unhappy.
Okay, so Aristotle's given us this fantastic map, and the destination is crystal clear, virtue. But that leaves us with the million-dollar question, right? How in the world do we get there? How do we actually go from being in a state of constant struggle to a state of harmony?
Aristotle's answer is just so simple but so practical. He says character isn't some fixed thing you're born with. It's something you build. And how do you build it? Through action. You want to be a just person? You have to start by doing just things. Again and again and again.
And this leads us to his core idea of habituation. So think of virtue less like a light switch you can just flip on and more like a muscle you have to train, or maybe a garden you have to carefully tend to. It is a skill. You can't just wake up and be a great pianist because you want to be, and you can't just become a good person by intending to be. It takes practice.
Aristotle really saw this as a journey, almost like climbing a ladder. You start on the bottom rung in a state of continence, that's our struggling donor, where you just acknowledge that there's a fight going on inside you. Then you just keep choosing the right action, step by step, consistently. And it's this repetition that builds habits, that creates what he called a second nature. And then eventually, you reach the top of the ladder, true virtue, where the struggle itself just fades away.
So, what's our guide on this incredibly difficult journey? What's the tool we're supposed to use to keep choosing right? For Aristotle, the answer was obvious: reason. And it turns out his teacher, Plato, gave us a really powerful metaphor to help us understand its role.
So check out this allegory. Your soul is like a chariot. The person driving it, the charioteer, that's your reason. And it's trying to control 2 very different horses. One is a noble horse, and that represents all your good moral impulses.
The other is an unruly wild horse, and that represents your raw, irrational appetites. The entire goal of life is for the charioteer, your reason, to get these two horses to pull together and keep the whole chariot on the right path.
And here is the absolute crucial point. For Aristotle, living a good life means living according to our unique nature as human beings. And what is that nature? It's to be rational. So, a virtuous action is any action where our rational soul is firmly in the driver's seat, guiding our emotions and our appetites, not being dragged around by them.
Now, Aristotle's whole framework is incredibly powerful. It gives us a clear path forward. But the source material for this explainer raises a really sharp, very modern challenge to this ancient idea.
I mean, the whole theory of habituation makes sense when we're talking about actions. But what about feelings? I can force myself to wake up early every day. I can make it a habit. But can I ever force myself to enjoy waking up early? That's the gap that just seems so hard to bridge.
And this is really where the theory kind of hits a wall in real life. You can force yourself to build the habit. You can do the right thing. But that noble joy that Aristotle was talking about, sometimes it can feel completely out of reach. We can control our actions, sure, but can we really command our feelings?
And this leads to an even deeper, almost existential question. If this path is so hard, and if getting to that joyful state of virtue isn't even a guarantee, why bother?
Seriously, what is the ultimate motivation for this lifelong struggle? If we're all just headed for the same end anyway, why put in all this effort to tame our desires and build a virtuous character? What's the end game here? What's the final reward?
Well, this leads to two very different answers. For Aristotle, the reward is something called eudaimonia. It's a word that means more than just happiness. It's about human flourishing, living the absolute best, most complete and fulfilling life you possibly can. For him, the reward for virtue is the virtuous life itself. But an alternative view suggests that our real motivation lies in a higher purpose, achieving an eternal joy that comes from taking part in a divine goodness. This quote from our source really captures the bittersweet feeling of a purely worldly goal. The argument it's making is that even the most flourishing life, if it's all stuck inside a finite existence, is kind of like being a bird in a cage. You're just making the best of a limited situation.
And that's where we'll end it, right back where we started, with a really powerful question. Is the journey to become a better person, that struggle for a flourishing life, is that enough of a reward all by itself? Or, for it to be truly meaningful, does our quest for virtue need to be aimed at something bigger, something beyond the confines of our mortal lives? That's a question for all of us to think about.